Hello everyone, here we're tackling the water part of what I like to call the water, food, energy nexus, arguably the most important link in the chain, and without it the nexus doesn't get going. One of our speakers before we joined mentioned that we've survived millennia without electricity, but we can only survive 7 days or so without water, so that really does help put it into context. Some of the challenges in Oman's water sector include water shortages, high water consumption in the domestic sector, unsustainable groundwater use in the agricultural sector, historically misdirected subsidies, that has been changing, and looking forward to hearing about that, and energy intensive desalination. Now, of course, a lot of these problems or challenges, let's call them, are echoed across the Middle East, but it is quite a range of pressure points on a nation that already lies within one of the world's greatest areas of water stress. 70% of the region is exposed to high or very high water stress, and water scarcity will cost the MENA region up to 14% of its GDP by 2050, warns the World Bank. So clearly the clock is ticking and urgent action needs to be taken. We're hopefully going to hear today how some of that progress is already being made. We're also going to hear the follow-up effects of COP, and we're going to be asking what's next. So thank you again for joining us. We're going to zoom in on the question now, technology. What technologies have the potential to change the face of renewable desalination and water reuse in Oman? First, I'm very glad to welcome Zaher Al-Salami. He is the president of the Oman Water Society. Thank you very much for joining us. Can you give us a brief idea of what your thoughts are, please?
Thank you for this invitation and opportunity. I'm Zaher Sulaimani, Oman Water Society member and founder. The society basically has a lot of role in bringing the stakeholders together and emphasizing on the importance of research, since our members are from the academia and from the industry and from the public sector. So we are playing a good role on highlighting the issue of importance of research, because we know our water situation. We are in an area where it is dry. The rainfall is very minimal, and when we have a lot of rain, it is coming as a flash flood and leaving quickly. And we have high rainfall in the mountain where there is no land to use it, so also there is a challenge. So we are thinking of there is some resources which is not tapped very much and not used, like the wastewater treated effluent and produced water, which is associated to the oil, where in the morning session they said it is about 10 barrels for each, 10 barrels of water for 1 barrel of oil. And this is a huge amount which we can use it if we have the right technology to treat this and make it useful for other uses. So this is basically what I think is to start up with this session and this discussion. Of course, using the new technology and the up-to-date for agriculture irrigation system is crucial. It is very important. We cannot continue with the traditional way of irrigation. So this combination of things and renewable energy, I think the key for the future to be sustainable, and the Nexus will work together.
Excellent, thank you very much. If you could just jump on mute, we can stop the echo back. That'd be great, please, Zaher. Thank you for that. Quite a few points there we're going to loop back to the importance of bringing stakeholders together, and also looking at, as you say, the thinking the way resources are used to really maximize water savings, especially when it comes to oil production. I'd like to dive into that. Next up is Richard Connor, the Water Resources Specialist, World Water Assessment Programme, also known as WWAP at UNESCO. Richard, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you, everybody, and thank you for the kind invitation. In a nutshell, I think there's an elephant in the room here that has not been addressed. Oman is 75% of its water use is groundwater, of which the vast majority is non-renewable. So you can talk about water reuse, and water reuse is extremely important. It's not just the water reuse itself. If you're talking about reusing urban water supplies, then you can also extract from the chemical energy in wastewater, convert that into biogas. So you can also remove the nitrogen and phosphorus, use that as fertilizer. So the importance of the water reuse needs to be, it deserves to be considered for sure. But the question is, like, how much water is really used for agriculture? Like somewhere between 70 and 80%. Now, desalination is just, even solar desalination, still, you've got to get that water from the desaled water to the crops. And so the transport, and of course it's desal, so you're at sea level. So no matter where you're growing the crops, it's going to take even more energy to transport that water towards the crops. So desal for you as a use or as a source of fresh water for agriculture is questionable in terms of energy use. So let's talk about where the water is coming from, and that's groundwater. And I'll stop there, and I'll get into groundwater later because my minute is up.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you. And next up, we have Dr. Eduardo Bogomio, water specialist at the World Bank. Thank you very much. Great to see you again.
Thanks, Michelle, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to, be a bit provocative and suggest that no technology will help us address water scarcity, and I think we should be thinking more about innovation from the, if you like, soft side, so institutions and organizations. How do we run our water utilities? How do we run our irrigation departments? Can we make improvements there? Because that's really an area where lots of improvements need to be made. And I'm a big fan of non-renewable desalination and wastewater reuse. I just think that just investing technologies that create water supply gives us a false sense of abundance. And paradoxically, that invites us to use more water. And we see this clearly in the Gulf states, which have lots of desalination and are also the top consumers of water per capita in the world. I'll stop there and looking forward to the discussion.
That's very nicely phrased, this false sense of abundance. Just before we jumped on, you said that those privileged enough to have immediate access to water supplies, no matter what perhaps we try and do, that false sense of security is absolutely ingrained in all of us. Thank you very much. David Reavley, he's the CEO of Solar Water. Thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure. Good morning, everybody. I don't think anything significant can be achieved without collaboration. There's not one solution for this twin problem of water shortages and climate change. Solar water can help, we believe, about 75 countries, right? But there's about 177 countries that have difficulty. We believe that we have a game-changing solution. We are totally sustainable. We can produce water in high volume. We can also produce green electricity. To Richard's comment about irrigation and where the water source is, you're speaking from Italy. Well, the Romans were moving water about 1,200 meters about 2,000 years ago without electricity. So I think the world has to just apply a little bit of innovation. I think water will become the new oil. If we don't do something, it's not just about social economic issues, it will become a security issue. It is depleting supply of fresh water for socio-economic development and health. And we are in the middle of COVID-19. And one of the things about COVID-19, the control of it, is people are saying hygiene, hygiene, wash your hands, wash your hands. How can you wash your hands if you don't have any water? So I thank Michelle for referencing the 7 millennia that we lived without electricity. And I challenge anybody on the world to live more than 7 days without water. So water is the source of life. Without water, nothing happens. Food doesn't grow, people don't grow. We can't make anything, we can't build anything, because we start by digging a hole, mixing some concrete. I believe you mix concrete with water. So no matter what our problem is that we're trying to solve, it starts with, do we have sufficient water? And at the moment, we don't. We have to do something urgently. I can help.
Well, we just spoke just before we signed on about the reaction at COP and the key takeaways on that when it comes to water, which we will discuss as well just towards the end. I've just got my eye on the clock because it wasn't as heartening as I think a lot of us would have hoped it to be. So just moving on, Zaher, I really want to get an idea of how Oman feels about desalination. So at the moment, there are around 47 small plants, and the government says supply about 86% of the country's potable water. And of the population now is about 5.1 million, expected to rise by double digits by 2050, of course, putting more pressure on that environmental system. What is from your point of view, what is Oman's approach to desalination? We've heard that, there are some question marks above it, that there needs to be changes to the way it's managed as well. David's highlighted, another technology that could be used. Is that on the cards for Oman at the moment, considering its big reliance on desalination? Zaher, you're on mute.
Thanks. I think in Oman we are well known about the water management, and we have tried in the last. I think we tried for about 20 years to do only demand management by rationalizing the use of water. But because of the drought and there is no source of water, we didn't have, or the government didn't have choice only to go for desalination. That they expanded the investment in the desalination and start supplying domestic water from desalination. This is started only not maybe 20 years or 15 years ago. We have embarked on the huge program of desalination because of the scarcity of water. Demand is increasing and the storage of water, the rainfall is decreasing. So some of the villages and cities, they are left without water, so the government took the decision that desalination will reduce this. Of course, the footprint, environment, everything, energy consumption, all comes with this desalination. And even if we use the renewable energy, still it is not mature enough to use it for desalination. And even this renewable energy, if we go for solar or other technology, maybe we will not have the footprint impact, negative impact here, but in the factory or in the industrial countries. So it is all need some balance and in the mixes to find a green technology and to make sure you are managing the demand of your consumption. And I agree with
Thank you very much. Just on, on that point, talking about green technologies, if you could just go on mute, please. Thank you. Talking about green technologies, Eduardo, what technologies do you see standing out as potential game changers in improving the way we manage water, just on the back of what we've just heard?
So I think there is lots of attention being given to advances in membrane technologies. So I think people are all familiar with that. That's a key area where things are moving. There is also interest in water harvesting technologies, harvesting water directly from the air. I think that's also a promising area. And then there is increasing attention, as you all know, to what we call nature-based technologies. And actually, Richard and his team wrote a big study on this a few years back. I think there is increasing interest, mimicking nature to help us solve water problems, be it flooding or also filtering water, so cleaning our drinking water supplies. I think those are some of the engineering technologies. And then, Michelle, and I'll conclude, going back to the first point I make, we also need to be looking at innovations on the institutional side. For instance, how is a utility well run? Can we learn from Singapore and the way in which they provide incentives for their water utility workers to perform better? And how do we link that to an improved service for the consumer that then translates into a higher willingness to pay fully for the improved water service? Over.
And Richard, do Eduardo's mentioned this word, the big I word, a couple of times, like innovation. What sorts of sense of innovation do you feel is happening in Oman and the wider Middle East? Of course, this is all about Oman's roadmap, what's next for the Sultanate. How do you feel it's rolling out?
Sorry, was that for me?
Yes.
I don't know what's going on really in Oman in terms of so
you kicked off with talking about the groundwater figures in Oman.
Oh, yes.
Really
well, in that case, yes. Yeah. I mean, you can talk about innovation through the roof, but where is the water coming from? I disagree with David when he says that there was no electricity. Well, I agree with him that there was no electricity during Roman times, but what I disagree with is that they used gravity. It was like water coming from the mountains and stuff, and so they built aqueducts. What I'm talking about is the difficulty to go from sea level up. So that's where we disagree. I mean, Eduardo was talking about nature-based solutions, and Zaher mentioned that there are flash floods. Now, what you can do, with sand dams and there's different approaches to try to capture that water so that you can recharge your aquifers. Because again, if 75% of water use, or the source of water in Oman is from groundwater, this should be a central point of thought and discussion. Now, one of the problems with groundwater, it's invisible. We don't see it when we don't know how much is, and it's not like this, it's not like a simple bottle that you could see what the level is. It all depends on where it is, the different characteristics of the different aquifers. The aquifers are also transboundary. So what is being done in neighboring countries might actually affect the amount of water that is available to your country and vice versa. And so the number one, I think, in terms of, you could call it innovation, but I would just call it basic knowledge and data. And it's to find out what what the groundwater situation is, what's available, and of course, throughout North Africa and the Middle East, the groundwater supplies are generally fossil. So there's not that much recharge going on, and so you've got basically a bank account of water that is not being recharged. And so every time you use a little bit of it, it just goes down and nothing's coming back into your bank account. However, if you have enough water that you can use it in times of severe scarcity, if you use it, in other words, not so much sustainably, but intelligently, you can keep this for several generations until the technologies of desal and everything else comes up, and then we can find another way to do things. And this knowledge, one of the sources of this knowledge is oil and mining companies. Oil and mining companies, when they do their forage, they know where the water is. They know how much water, and how confined the aquifers are, and so the hydrogeology is there. But they don't share that information. That information is private. Now, so the number one thing that I think we need to push is that this knowledge, although okay, it's privately owned and it has economic repercussions, should be at least made available to the hydrogeologists of the country that are trying to figure out, okay, well, which aquifers can we really use, and which ones are like, oh no, this is like a bad idea.
Excellent, thanks for that. I think, again, that ties into a couple of points that Zaher started off mentioning as well, saying about resources not tapped. And obviously we know Oman is an oil producer, and the other point that keeps the words being mentioned once, but really it keeps circling back, is data. And you talked there about hydrogeologists. We talked, Eduardo as well, talking about the need for more transparency and hinting at the importance of data. Zaher, just before I come back to you, I'd like to ask you about subsidies. David, you wanted to jump in there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting. We have endless debates, and there's an awful lot of talking. Very few people seem to be doing something, and yet there is an obvious solution. If you look at the coastline that Oman enjoys, I don't know how many thousands of kilometers of coastline, it has quite a low population, so there's lots of land there. There is a solution. I can provide a solution, right, that doesn't burn fossil fuel. Right? It's totally sustainable. It uses God's given sunlight and the ocean, and I can provide a solution. I've been to Oman several times, but nobody seems to want to do anything.
Zaher, what do you feel?
I can give you 40,000 cubic meters a day, right?
One second. Let Zaher respond. 1 second, please. Let Zaher respond. Zaher, so David's sharing, we've obviously heard from all the others as well. And David's saying that his response when he comes to Oman, and there's this ready-made solution, and it's not really picking up traction. And that feeds back to what we were talking about at the very beginning about what's Oman's take on what's next.
Thank you. Yeah, David, I cannot comment without knowing the solution. What is the solution? So I need to know the solution first, then I can comment or react on what he's proposing.
I use sunlight to desalinate water.
Yeah, this technology, yes, known it is, but it's very expensive for the farmers. But I think,
well, see, when it comes to price, it's not the price of doing it; it's the price of not doing it. How much do you want to pay for your water? I can give you water at an economical price.
Okay, so let's broaden it out a little bit. So that's an interesting point that David just put out there. We've heard that line a lot, and it's critical. It's more important to pay up now than the greater cost later down the line of us not doing anything, and that applies to water and that applies to the broader energy transition. And thank you for bringing up cost there, David, because Zaher, I want to ask you about the state of subsidies. So we know that the subsidies for electricity and water total about $1.9 billion in the 2020 budget, and that there were plans to kick off this year to really start reducing those water subsidies in Oman. Can you give us an update on where that's at, please?
Yeah, I think the government is going ahead with lifting the subsidies, and they have started. For industrial and commercial use, they already advanced in this, and this year they started lifting subsidies from the domestic use. And that's my rationalize the use of water and reduce the consumption, but also it might have side effect on the industry and commerce. So it has to be balanced with other things also, and especially if we are talking about the mixes, and agriculture will be most affected also by lifting subsidies from energy and water. So the government, in conclusion, it's going ahead with lifting the subsidies.
And so at the moment, so the subsidies have been lifted for industry and commercial and for water, and then they are also being lifted for domestic. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
And will they be lifted for domestic this year?
Yeah, they started lifting for domestic, and the tariff is increased a little bit.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. David, would you mind going on mute, just because if more of us ask you, there's more of a pushback. Eduardo, I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on COP. Like I said, I really wanted to loop back to this because I think it ties in so directly, not just to what Oman needs in terms of water education and awareness, but every country needs. What were your main takeaways when it comes to water, please?
So I think I did not attend COP, so I guess my takeaways are just from observing from outside. But the good thing was that for the first time there was a water pavilion at COP, so a dedicated space to water, and that's a great, a great aspect. And then some of the commitments that were made are also very relevant for water management. For example, reforestation, we need to understand what that implies for water supplies around the world, for example. And then secondly, I think this increasing push for the energy transition will have an impact on our choices around water supply. And I think we're discussing this now with the engineer Zaher. There will be choice need to be made in terms of the water supply portfolio that we want to have. And obviously desalination and reuse are key opportunities there, but unless we can make them, we can fuel them with renewable energy, then they will not be viable. So yeah, lots of takeaways, but I think the most important takeaway was that for the first time, water had a dedicated space in the COP.
Well, I mean, we talk about awareness and need to increase awareness, and the fact that this event is even being held in Oman, I'm sure Zaher will agree with me. The fact that this event is even being held in Oman shows that there's a real push to build national awareness, and there's an appreciation to try and do something proactively. What are your thoughts, Richard? How do you think COP went? I know you're a bit like me, a little bit disappointed, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I echo Eduardo's positivity about COP, but there's always been this dichotomy, or if you will, that climate change mitigation is about greenhouse gases and adaptation is about water. And so all of the investments and you've got the climate funds are heavily weighted towards mitigation, whereas since climate change is going to affect societies and the environment through water, there needs to be more investment in adaptation with water. But water can also, it also poses gives an opportunity for mitigation. Just the way the wastewater treatment accounts for somewhere between 4 and 7% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So, investing in wastewater treatment, and which would include nature-based solutions, so that you don't have to treat the water in the first place, is actually an investment in mitigation. It's not just about water, or it's not just about adaptation. So the more you invest in water, the more you have a double.
That's exactly what David was saying about it being a twin problem, exactly as you were saying, that they're so interlinked.
Yes, yeah. And there's a lot more interlinkages. Well, this goes back to what you were saying in your introduction, is that it should be the water and everything else nexus. And water is seen as a sector, even at a country level, outside of climate change, but just overall, water is seen as a social or an environmental issue. And so it gets the political attention that social environmental issues get, whereas energy is seen as an economic issue. So it gathers more political will importance because it's economic. It's like, oh well, we need energy, we need electricity, electrification, and for to build our economies. And the fact is, no, water is the number one, because you still can't have energy without water, whether it's for cooling systems or etc.
What I think was really interesting, you just touched there on the social side, is that we heard so much, not enough, but we heard so much about when Cape Town was running out of water, and it really dominated the headlines. And if we go back to the electricity side of it, again, what David touched on, the millennia point, there have been blackouts for decades, in Cape Town, and electricity blackouts and so on, and we don't really hear anything about it. But it kind of strikes at our primal fear of no water. Oh wow, that and it's that psychological aspect. And you said it's a social point, and I feel that it's very much, people see it very much as a social right, and they don't think about that supply chain that comes along with it, and that it's not it is part of that broader energy chain. I just wanted to just go an eye on the clock, unfortunately, and just want to get an idea from you, Zaher, please, about your ideas on what were mentioned. So we had sand dams, which were very interesting, membrane tech, water harvesting tech, nature-based tech. There are a lot of solutions here. Are any of these really jumping out at you for use in 2022?
Oman is building a recharge dam from the last 50 years, and we are having about more than 20 dams. But as you noticed, everybody has noticed, the climate change, and we have more frequent floods, cyclones. So we are now converting this recharge dam to a protection dam, because we cannot continue, and this recharge dam might be not suitable as a protection dam. So we are converting this dam to protection, and at the same time they capture this flood and recharge the groundwater. But because of the huge consumption in the last years and the abstraction, we have the saline intrusion and depletion of water, the groundwater is in the seaside, in the shoreline, the saline intrusion coming in, but inland there is no water, it is dry. The wells will dry, and the flood system is, although it was sustainable for a long time, but now it is affected by drought, and we have long period of drought, then these supplies are affected. And By the way, recently the Oman Water Society has an initiative, and thanks for UNESCO, they have a chair, UNESCO chair on aflage studies in Nizwa University in Oman. This will concentrate on the aflage system and how to best use this and control the water flow and these things. So again, I think the technology for treatment of water is very crucial. Either wastewater or the produced water. It is these sources are not tapped, and we think now that nanotechnology is advancing and might help. And also the forward desalination, which is not consuming a lot of energy, also an important. This, as David said, the solar or thermo desalination, it can be looked at and see if it is possible to have a centralized and share the cost by the farmers. That will be a good idea. But again, I don't think now the government is investing on desalination for agriculture. It is left for the farmer society and other big farm investor who can buy this technology. And again, the waste, the brine, the salt which is coming out of desalination is also need to look at it. Thank you.
David, yes, by all means jump in, but we only have about 4 minutes left, and I still need to get your action, so please can you keep it very brief.
Yeah, I'm just saying that we have funds available, right?
I think this is a conversation that can be had offline. Just like I say, we're tight on time, and it sounds like you both have quite a bit to talk about, and there's a lot of opportunity there. So by all means, in terms of the the companies and the pricing agreements and so on, then that's something that you can look at separately. So we've talked about a lot today. We've spoken about the twin problem that David pointed out, water and climate change, the elephant in the room, and that Richard was saying, the very blue elephant, and how organizations need to think about rerunning their water and reorganizing how they do it in this false sense of abundance, bringing stakeholders together, which is exactly what's happening on this call between Zaher and David as well, and collaborating, and especially when it comes to cross-border and thinking about aquifers, I think that might be a few years away, but in terms of cross-border collaboration, we've not seen with gas and other areas, but hopefully it will happen on water due to necessity. And we've spoken about lots of technologies as well. So there's been a broad conversation. What I'm really keen to hear just before we wrap up is as an action point from each of you. What would you really like to see happen or must happen when it comes to technologies for water use in Oman for 2022? Richard, may I start with you, please?
Sure. Quickly, two things. Mining and oil companies need to share the information on aquifers, and two, water experts and those in knowledge should stop just watering their lawns.
Eduardo, please.
Yeah, so I guess my suggested technology is water accounting, which means it's a technology that allows us to understand who, where, and how much water is being used. And this helps us really then target measures to conserve water. So again, let's not focus just on supply side technology, but also on understanding who and where and what is using water.
Thank you very much. And David.
For an action point, I would like to have a meeting with the Minister of Water, and I can explain to him how we can assist the peoples of Oman. And another action point is to change the attitudes of stop talking and let's do something. We talk and talk and talk. Let's do something. The cost of not doing something is going to be horrendous. The technology is there. Just let's implement it.
Okay, thank you very much. Focus on implementation, less talking. Thank you very much for that, David. And Zaher, over to you for our closing comment, please. Can you give an idea of what you would like for next year as an action point, the most important thing on your agenda, please?
Yeah, in closing, I think we should empower the researcher. and we encourage them to find more innovative idea and research program to have a new water resources. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. It's an interesting mix of action and talking there that we ended on for 2022. So unfortunately, we've run out of time. I do think that we could have spoken about this for 4 or 5 hours, frankly, but c'est la vie, we didn't have very long. Zaher, thank you very much. Thank you, Richard. And thank you, Eduardo and David. Speak to you soon. Thank you very much.